Bear with me. Hi, I'm Conor Byrne, and this is That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Today is the second part of our slightly different show. We are recording live in Dublin in HubSpot House, thanks to HubSpot for Startups, the all-in-one CRM that scales as your startup grows. This is a room filled with insight-led, customer-focused, brand-loving, pitch-perfected marketers and agencies. And thanks for joining us today. Norm, at this point, I would do a bit of a summary about what we're about to talk about. And even though it is Paul Dervan, I have no idea what's coming next. So I will just start by introducing our next guest in this live series, officially former CMO of the National Lottery, Paul Dervan. Paul, you are my first return guest. So you were season 1, episode 2, where we got to talk about how boxer shorts got you into the world of advertising. So we won't go there because people can go and listen to that episode if you want to know more about that story. But for anyone who doesn't know you, who's listening to this, maybe just a very quick, short introduction of who you are and your path and path to becoming former CMO of the National Lottery.
Just for the record, Conor announced the former CMO while I was still working there. It's impressive. So a short summary of what? Of
you. So you. Oh, do you know? Let's start with you. There was a foray into youth work at one point, but that didn't work out. Am I right?
Well, I was there, but it's not that it didn't work out. Yeah, I was a care worker for a little bit. Yeah.
And then you decided to change path and go into marketing. But you always had a love for marketing. So how did that come about that you wanted to change that path and get into marketing?
Well, I liked both. So I liked marketing from a long time, since I was very young. Like even the age of 10 or 11, I was interested in advertising, which sounds a bit odd. But yeah, so I did detour into kind of care work for a little bit. And for those who don't know, myself and Conor worked together in Bardstown in 300 years ago.
Yeah.
So our paths crossed there. Yeah, and then I left that and went off searching for a job in marketing in the late 90s. Yeah.
Which led you to kind of direct mail, direct marketing, which...
Yeah, direct mail, direct marketing. I have a love for direct marketing and actually used that to try and get my first job because I couldn't get one. So I did some risk-free offers to employers to get them to hire me. Yeah, and it worked.
It did work. And then also in that period, you have a very successfully failed business along the way.
Which one?
The driving school, which was a huge direct mail element to that as well, wasn't
That's
it?
Right. Yeah. So we launched a driving. I'd forgotten. We launched a driving school. Ironically, I didn't have a driver's license, which was probably the part. We launched which probably was an online driving school, a little bit ahead of our time on this one. Where, if I remember correctly, the proposition was. Correct me if I get this wrong.
I will.
The proposition was we would. If you failed, basically, we would train you until you passed.
Yeah, if you failed, we would pay for your test.
Yeah, and then we offered actually free booklets of like the theory test.
Yeah, do you remember the name?
Roadrunner. We had t-shirts,
yeah,
like Larry's t-shirts here today.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't have barcodes on them.
No.
Yeah, so that was failed. It had a great proposition. Operationally, it wasn't great, and I'm not sure if we were going to make the margins on it. So still, it was fun. When was that? That was 2000.
Yeah, just before our time, I think. Yeah, actually, no one else has done it since.
We were too early. Yeah.
We were just too wrong. Yeah. So, right, let's get on to the serious business of you joined the National Lottery 4 years ago, I guess coming out of semi-retirement at the time. What was it that drew you out of?
Call it unemployment, semi-retirement. Yeah. I had been working, so I wasn't working when I joined the lottery. I was doing a little bit of consulting, but I was mostly just playing with Lego, I think, if I'm honest. With kids.
Your kids.
Yeah. So I had been working with you, Conor, and some others here in Indeed till 2018, and then I stopped. it was a very busy job, and there was a lot of traveling. And my kids I have twin boys at the time; they were 2, so I stopped working, and actually did aspire to not work again for a while. Yeah, it's true. I used to take photographs of cans of beer from the park and just send them to people who I knew were working. Because if anyone remembers, 2018 was a really good summer in Ireland. So I did my best to take full advantage of that. But then I was lured back into full-time employment about 4 years ago. Yeah, it's the lottery. Yeah.
When you got into that lottery, I mean, look, it's a huge brand institution almost in the country. What were the things you discovered when you got there?
The first thing I discovered is how big it really was, in the sense that it had over 70% penetration. So 7 out of 10 adults in any given year play the lottery in some format. It was so high, I wasn't sure if that even could be true, but it was. Yeah. And then even the levels of frequency of play were just incredibly high. So I knew it was a big brand. I just didn't realize how large it was in terms of customer numbers. Yeah.
So that's all great, like big customer numbers, well-known brand. You didn't obviously just go in and say, well, just keep doing what we're doing. What were the discoveries that mattered then when you went in?
So we made some changes a little while after I got there. There were a few things I thought that we could try and do better. The brand wasn't visually as cohesive as it is now, in the sense that there's actually, we treated it as having 4 brands. So we had Euro Millions, which is 130 million, by the way, this week. If anyone's playing, yeah. So there was Euro Millions, which was considered a brand, and then there was Lotto brand, there was scratch cards and other stuff like that, and then there's a National Lottery brand. So it was, in some way, it was being managed as a portfolio of separate brands or separate identities, and I wasn't entirely sure if that was the best way to get the most out of it, because there were a lot of similarities between them. They're both in the same place. The motivations are similar, and one of the challenges with that is you're then supporting 4 brands with 4 separate pieces of work and things like that as well. So that's something we changed. So we went to a unified single master brand.
But it wasn't a gut feeling, right?
No,
what did you do to figure that out?
I don't trust my gut feeling on anything these days. No, so we would do an awful lot of research, and we'd have hypotheses. So my view had been, I wonder, is this the best way to do this? And actually, it was kind of tricky because lots of other lotteries do it the same way too.
The portfolio.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So I was looking around trying to find out, are there good examples of other brands that are in the lotteries that do that? But if you looked at the evidence, there wasn't really strong reasons. Like, there was some potential hypothesis that they had different brand personalities, and that was a reason for them to be treated separately. I didn't really find enough evidence to support that. And there was some really good reasons to move to a unified brand.
Like,
well, you're putting all your budget into one brand. The other thing is this: the lottery. The lottery is a huge. It does a huge amount for society, in terms of, like, about over 4 million every week goes to good causes, and that hadn't been communicated for about 7 years. And if you don't communicate these things, people start to forget. But if you want to build that into the brand, and you've got 4 different brands, how do you do that? So by having a unified brand, then you could start to talk about parts of the brand, and just focus in general. Like, I don't know if I haven't looked at your questions because you probably haven't written any, but it's
a shopping list.
So there's most you will probably know that the tagline for the National Lottery is "It could be you," but I don't know if anyone can remember what the tagline was back in 2013. Do you know?
No.
You're a big lotto player. You should know this stuff, yeah. Right? So it used to be "It could be you," and then it was dropped in 2013. I don't think it was actually dropped. It was just probably as they went into different products, it was dropped. But we'd done some research with Red Sea, and we found that if you say the words "it could be you," I think at the time 60% of people were able to say who that brand was. And this is in 2020, it having not been around since 2013. Right. So we brought that back. And it used to be, by the way, time to play.
Wow. Yeah.
There you go. So anyway, so like the problem with taglines is if you don't use them all the time, they just get forgotten, and a lot of them are generic and worthless anyway. But if they are good, you should probably hang on to them. So there was some advantages to doing those kind of things, and actually the challenge with that is there was different brand identities with different colors and different taglines pre that, and it was a lot of stuff, you know.
And so the unification was around kind of the same tagline, the same colors across
one brand. So one brand personality, one brand identity, one tagline, one tone of voice, and within that, then you start to pull apart the products.
Yeah.
So, like the best example I can think of is every Christmas we have this millionaire raffle campaign, which has been running for 3 years now. Only core people left in the room, but core made it. It's really good, and it's a girl giving this guy like a millionaire raffle ticket, and they kind of fight for a while, and that is clearly from the National Lottery, but it's clearly about millionaire raffle. So the way we talk about communications in the National Lottery now, or at least it was up to a week ago, is that
come back to the 2012 book.
No, we'll come back to that question. But the communications in the National Lottery they're always from the National Lottery. Like the small things like the end frame is always the same. It's always the same voice. It's the same tagline, all that stuff. But we're able to talk about particular products in a way that feels like we're talking about Minrap, or we're talking about Euro Millions from the National Lottery. So it's a bit of discipline, but it seems to work.
And like touching in that space is kind of you looked at the distinctive brand assets that you had. So obviously, you know, can you talk to me a bit about that process and what you did?
Yeah, and so it's one of our big things, but I guess the reason why it's important is to take a step back, which is attention is fleeting. So we did a lot of work, and there's a lot of work out there, and a lot of people in the room probably know it, but attention is fleeting. So you don't have an awful lot of time in advertising or any communications before attention starts to drop off. And at its most extreme level, if you take a typical Facebook ad, so if you buy an ad on Facebook, active attention is probably no more than 2 or 3 seconds. So after that, you can safely assume that most people will not have seen that ad.
Yeah.
Now that's a tough brief, because when you're making ads, you want to maybe sell something. You want them to know who it is. You want them to you want the messaging and the branding all to be correct. And if you only have 2 to 3 seconds, that doesn't give you an awful lot of space. So, and really you need, unless you have a distinctive asset, you've only got your brand name.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that will signal who you are. But if you, so brand assets are non-name elements of your brand. And if you have a distinctive brand asset, and if it's well known and well linked to you, then you can use that in your communications, so that you don't get misattribution up front. You hope that people at the very, very least know who this brand is advertising, which sounds like a very low bar, but that's what we aim for. And so what we did is we looked again with Red Sea. We looked to see, well, what distinctive assets does the lottery already have? And we looked at a load of things. We looked at how many colors. So we asked, we had a bunch of colors, and we got people to see if they could identify who we were from those colors. And the only color that we'd any way of kind of association with was the color green. When it comes to distinctive assets, you're not trying to find out what they think of your brand. What you're trying to do is you show them or listen to something, and you want to see whether your brand gets evoked. So that's the difference. And so what we did is we cut out a lot of the colors, because they had no association, regardless of how attached we might have been internally. they
Just
like
gone.
red didn't have any association, even though red Lotto used to be red.
Yes. Yeah.
And even on the app, you can see we still use the colors a little bit because you have to do some sort of signposting. So we did that. We found that our tagline "It could be you" was both correct for the brand strategy and also liked and known. So that was helpful, and short, so it was good. And we actually at the time we actually also found there was some resonance with we used an Elvis track in our music.
But that was one you brought in.
The Elvis track.
No, the Elvis track was there.
So no, we didn't. So the Elvis track had been used in a Euro Millions ad for about 4 years.
Okay.
You know the one with the island?
Yes.
So that had been played. That had been played probably more than the lottery had hoped, but it was a very successful ad, but it'd probably been outstayed its welcome. But the music in that was just for Euro Millions, so we transferred that across to all of lottery.
Okay.
Yeah, and that worked quite well. And then we started to create new assets as well.
So what were the ones that you?
Well, the ones that people remember is we created initially was the water slides.
Yeah.
So what we did is we used that in a launch campaign, and we said if it works well, if we think it's beginning to pick up, we will use it as a distinctive asset. And what we generally do is we put some benchmarking in place early, and if we think it's going to grow, then we'll double down on that. And that we did that. And actually, about a year ago, or maybe a little longer, we started to evolve from the water slides for a couple of reasons, but we wanted to contain and maintain the consistency. So we actually, there's a yellow, you know, those little yellow rings that people kind of go down slides, and we started measuring that and using that. So even as we did ads that didn't have water slides, we still managed to keep that yellow floaty thing in. And then we brought in new music, which was Mr. Blue Sky by Yellow. I don't have any numbers for you, but they're all very high. But and that works really well, except that a lot of people then give me abuse because I've ruined the song. Yeah. But and then the last one is a character. So we didn't have a character. And there's a lot of good research to suggest that a character can work really well. There's more flexibility, all that kind of stuff. I was going to bring one early in the early days, but that came to a close earlier than I'd hoped.
Is that because you can't use a monkey in advertising?
No, it was actually a guy in a rabbit suit, but it's a story that requires more time. And so we then introduced this character called the Dream Inspector for Euro Millions, within the realm of that.
When stuff like that starts to work, well, first of all, actually the music. So the Elvis track was working incredibly well. You continue to use it. There was a bit of a risk there.
Well, it wasn't really a risk.
No, I mean, it was.
Yeah. So, like, first you could go back to it if you wanted to. You'd be able to go back and you'd see the scores pop again if you needed to. We thought about bringing in a new music track. We didn't want to have multiple music tracks. It's expensive, but we brought in a new music track, and partly is we wanted to see if we could just bring a little level of excitement into it. This kind of this trade-off between novelty and then consistency. You know, you mentioned fresh consistency, which is a nice way to think about it. And so we did decide that we'd bring in the ELO track, and actually I probably asked you to look at it at the time. I get Connor to have a sneaky preview of all our work because he's pretty honest. And so we actually, I'm probably sent to you. Yeah, I did because I think I went with your recommendation in the end. Maybe I didn't.
Let's go.
No, I chose against whatever you said. Yeah. So we made a new campaign called The Village. It's about this woman who walks down a field and opens kind of what looks like it's a skyline, but it's actually a
like the old Bosco door.
Yeah, into a water park. And that was when we introduced the Mr. Blue Sky. But we also at the same time were considering the Hall & Oates track, Make My Dream Come True, which also scored really high when we tested them both with System 1. So then I called a bunch of experts and you. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Connor is particularly astute when it comes to advertising. But I called a bunch of people whose opinions I rated, including Connor's and other people like Paul Feldwick and Peter Field, and said, would you look at these? What's your view? And really my question was, because I already had the scores. Yeah. My question was, would we be able, because the Mr. Blue Sky was such a famous track, would we be able to be associated with it? Because it's no good if it's already got it's so well known and understood that it doesn't link to you.
Yeah.
And we reckoned with the level of our media spend and the rigor that we placed on these things that we would be able to, and we did. So Emer still doesn't forgive me for not going with and it turns out Boots then used that a year later.
So it's theirs now. Yeah.
Well,
you mentioned the Dream Inspector, and that was successful as a character.
Yeah.
Was there then any kind of conversation or appeal of saying, "I want to use him across other parts of our advertising"?
That actually happened recently again. Yeah. So, yeah, is the answer. So the Dream Inspector is his character, and the guy who plays him is a guy called Brian Quinn. He's a really talented actor, and we were making a new campaign just before we finished up, and we had a bit of debate because we even got a casting tape from him, which I asked not for, but Damien, director, said anyways, a sneaky, and he was brilliant in this casting tape for a new campaign, which wasn't for Euro Millions, but we just. Be honest with you, we decided that we would stay on the plan that we said, which was be disciplined about this. Otherwise, it could cause confusion later on. But actually, he's doing something today for the team. He's doing some sort of activation on a bus somewhere. So yeah. So in preparing for the 130 million
this Friday.
Yeah. Did I mention that?
Yeah.
So we're pretty disciplined on that, and we're really disciplined on all those things in the sense that we know why we want to use them, and this is a struggle you see a lot where people involved get bored with stuff that they've been working on themselves, and people our colleagues and stuff, and they all get bored because
they're seeing it all the time.
They see so much of it, but then we just go back to the research. Like even the yellow track, as much as I get abuse from people, like if you look at the research, people really like the track and like it being associated with the brand, and it does a really good job evoking the brand. So they just don't hear it like 1,000 times like I do.
Yeah, because you're in the bubble. And I spoke with Rachel Fairley. It's kind of a brand transformation strategy. She's amazing. Works in B2B, but she pointed out nobody cares about your brand.
Yeah.
We forget that, don't we?
Yeah. And like you even take the lottery, it's a very small part of a lot of people's lives.
Huge part of mine.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But it's like the biggest barrier for playing the lottery is they just forget to play. It's just not on their mind. So
category entry points. You looked at that. You've got a complex set of products that you need.
It's not that complex. It's you should tell me you're going to ask that question. It's not that complex. We have a number of them, and like scratch cards compete with bars of chocolate as an entry point.
Yes, but my point being that they're different occasions.
They are different occasions. Yeah.
So how did you go about
we did
the category entry points?
So category entry points then is a measure of mental availability, which is kind of the big thing. That's one of the big kind of things that Ehrenberg Bass are promote, and the thinking of that is they're ways into the category. So if I have a need, or if in a certain place or whatever, what brands might come to mind to solve that need or desire. Some of them are really well known already in the business. So it was really a question of doing the research to find out what are the most frequent ones, what are the ones that we think you could do well in, and then start to use them. Like, well, I'll give you a couple of examples.
Please.
Yeah. So people dream of changing their lives a lot. So they like the research shows that like twice a week people have a thought about changing their lives, as in like, wouldn't it be great if it's not always money related? It could be like get healthier, get a new job, things like that. So that's an entry point in. So what happens in real world is someone goes, God, wouldn't it be amazing? And then they're like, oh, there's 130 million this Friday.
Yeah.
And they buy a ticket. And so we were able to track we knew how often people think about this. We knew how likely our brand is to be associated with that thought. And we also had some decent proxy work on how many people then went ahead and did purchase. And so that was a really big entry point. So this idea of dreaming of winning is an entry point that's probably the same for every lottery in the world, but it's a real one and an important one and a high frequency one. And later on, so you take scratch cards. Most people the main driver of buying scratch cards is just a little treat for yourself. So,
birthday cards, right?
Well, so that's it. So a treat for yourself is the main driver and motivation for it. So you're having a busy day, you're in the shops, you go, oh, do you know, I'll get a coffee and a scratchy. and and that's the main driver. But we also knew that for 51, so half the population, they would consider buying a scratch card if they're looking for something to put with a card in an envelope. So it was very specific. If you ask people in the kind of in the research, what brands would you consider when you're thinking of a gift? We're not in the park at all for that, because it's so broad.
Yeah.
Like it could be Smith's if it's for toys, it could be vouchers. But if you've got a card in hand and an envelope and you're getting someone a card and you're thinking what would be nice to put in with this, 50% of the population think of national lotteries. And so that's one that we started in the last year and a half to promote and communicate. Another entry point is petrol stations. So petrol stations kept turning up in our research as a really big area for when people think of buying a lottery ticket,
because they want to be the one on the news that's random petrol station in
maybe
yeah.
But like there's probably other, like we don't know whether it's just because it's easy to pull up and get one or whether you're there, but either way that doesn't matter. What matters is that the association is strong, and so we started doing advertising on petrol pumps and using our music in the stores. And
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So we did some deals with Stark and Core to promote. And so we were trying to get it into the court, the what do you call the forecourts? Yeah. But also in the shops. And then the branding in petrol stores is really good for us as well, because you often have this place stand outside. And then we'd measure, so as well as just measuring sales, we'd measure, are we improving our association, our mental availability with petrol stations? And,
right.
And that's so. And if we are, then we're building the long and the short, because we're getting the sale, but we're also building it in people's minds, which means that the theory goes, the stronger that link is among more people, the all else being equal, the more likely that will lead to a sale.
Was that the first time the media agency bought music in petrol stations as a channel?
Yeah, no, you do get a bit of that.
I'd never heard it before.
You can do deals. You can do deals with the stores where they'll do your ads.
But you were just buying the track.
Yeah. So, but yes, they can do it. I don't know if they've done it for other people like that. Yeah.
You talked about dream and dreaming as being one of the category entry points, and I guess people look at the job of CMO of a national lottery, and it seems like a dream job. You get to write a brief that says we open on the beach.
It's mandatory. It's built into the page. You can't take it out. Yeah.
But there are complexities to it, and one of those is probably around things you can and can't say. See, I mean, you probably can't just show an ad of someone dreaming about a new life, because they would
so it's funny. When I started, I was like, "This is amazing. We've no competitors," and then I figured out that we compete with everybody. But yeah, it's regulated. The lottery is regulated. There's a group of people who get up every morning, and their job is to regulate just the national lottery, and they do a very good job. In fairness, they're a very decent group of people, and they do a really good job regulating us and all sorts of things. But we have our own, when I was there, that we have a code which is built on top of the advertising code, and there's lots of things that you can't do, all for good reasons. Like you can't have children in your ads, you can't have alcohol, you can't suggest that this is a way out of a social class. You can't suggest it's an alternative to work.
But yet you still have incredible fun with the advertising. Like, it's very joyful. That's a hard balance to get right.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit like the beautiful constraint of a tight brief. And we work with some really talented creatives, and like, it's funny because the truth of the matter is, when people do think of winning the lottery or getting any vast sums of money, they go, you know what I'll do? I'll pay off the mortgage and I'll get a new house, things like that. And we, for good reasons, are not allowed to communicate those things. But you could also argue that that might be not that interesting anyway, because like it is kind of you're selling a kind of a sense of escapism. And so yeah, they're just some of the constraints.
And in some ways, the advertising is almost like it's almost unreal. It is almost
it's
you know what I mean? Like it's
slightly
a bit
fantasy.
Yeah,
it is, and that's always like, for example, and again, you'll know this, but our original water park campaign was this guy in an apartment, and he says, "Look, I haven't changed. You know, you don't just change your values." And then he gets a splash in the face, and you find out that he has built this water slide going all through the apartment blocks. But originally that was a swimming pool. And then, you know, one of the top creatives, a guy called Paddy, he's like, "Oh, swimming pool doesn't feel interesting enough." So they built it into a water park. And then for those who don't know, Connor had his own input in this, which, because you were like, "Oh, will this be shared with all their neighbors?" And I was like, "It will now." yeah. So,
sorry, there is a HubSpot all hands happening, I think. So that's the music. But anyway, we'll edit that bit out. So, you know, reflecting on your time at the lottery, do you have a favorite piece of work?
Of lottery work? Yeah, I do. I like a lot of it.
Favorite child?
I do. Yeah. No, I actually think a lot. Like, I do think the work generally is very good, and I do like it. My favorite ad is probably that one I described a moment ago, the original kind of water park one. I really liked that. That was funny. I really like the Christmas Millionaire Raffle one. Like that's a direct response campaign. And it was a really tough campaign to get right. But I like it. I still think it's kind of funny, and it does really well.
Why was it hard to get right?
That's a long story.
Okay.
Yeah. But it does really well, and it's a great example because the Millionaire Raffle, like, there's tickets, like, for previous number of years, tickets hadn't been sold out by the time it was done. And then we brought in this campaign, and nothing else really changed, and we sold out like a week early.
Really?
Right? Yes, we sold out for 3 years.
Media didn't change.
The media spend. We might have brought the media spend a little bit earlier, because it's kind of to try and fight with consideration, but it was roughly the same. And yeah, it was a great case where this, like, the positioning was more about gifting as opposed to something else beforehand, and just a really entertaining, well-branded piece of advertising. And it's sold out three like ever since it's gone live. We'll see how it goes this year, but it's sold out every year. Yeah.
What was the hardest work to do? And sorry, like, I'm thinking of you mentioned earlier on, communicating the amount of money that goes back to good causes. Like, was that a challenge to get that across? Because do people care? How do you make it feel lottery?
Yeah, I think that's one of the mistakes I made earlier, is I didn't know whether that was important, because because facts and figures are hard for people to take and remember, and good causes has lots of potential for emotional stuff. So for a couple of years, we did a lot of emotional led advertising, which was really good. Like, it did really well, like really high scores on System 1. People liked it. It helped build salience and build a general awareness. Oh yeah, these guys are like a lot like. So the way good causes works is, a knowledge of good causes does not prompt people to play the lottery. But what it does is, if you play and you don't win, having knowledge that a lot of the money goes back into the community makes you feel open to playing again. Yeah. So it has this kind of virtual loop that works quite well. So it did all that. But what I only realized later on is that actually information, like the fact that 4 million every week in, week out, goes to good causes, was an important piece of information that people should learn as part of their understanding of the proposition.
Right.
And so what that means is, and actually, so instead of sticking that in kind of an emotion-led campaign, really the kind of solution to that is to run concurrent campaigns. So there's a really good radio ad that Owen wrote
Yeah.
with Marty.
Marty Moment.
Yeah. So yeah, don't have a Marty meltdown. And that was a really good radio campaign that allowed us to, in an entertaining way, communicate.
How are you measuring the result of that specifically? Because that was a very specific thing you were trying to do. What was their
Well, there's
metrics on
different
that?
measures. So what we try and do, I'm a devil for this, but like we try and figure out what we want to do, and then when we know what it is, then I harass everybody involved to figure out good measures. So for that one, we would have benchmark to find out knowledge of 4 million. So we put the benchmark in. So once we decide what we're going to do, then we talk with Red Sea, and we add a question into our questionnaire, which is knowledge of 4 million going to good causes, and we get a benchmark. And then we start when we start doing any kind of advertising promotion on that, we just track that to see whether it's growing and improving. And then there's other measures. You can just measure things like recall of that particular ad execution. There's a number of other ways you can do it. But just what you're trying to do is get a bunch of data points that say this is the right thing to do and it seems to be working. Because there's loads of examples where, I won't go into them all, but those examples when there was things that the data points were suggesting it wasn't working. And I stopped them.
Or you kept going?
No. So we did we did 18 months of campaigns where we would do these very short radio ads telling people that there was like 2 winners of a large amounts last month. And what we wanted to do is try and help people understand that there's winners happening quite regularly. But we had a metrical win belief which was going up, but I couldn't find any evidence that those ads were getting any recall and that people knew them, anything like that as well. So we stopped that. Yeah. I
was going to ask you anything you'd have done differently, but I think you kind of maybe touched on that. But any other things you look back and reflect and wish you'd done differently?
Yeah, it's probably partly because of the pandemic, but I wish I'd spent more time with other lotteries. So because the insights are the same, and we could just nick stuff that's good. I think would have done that differently. I would have had that 2 kind of train going on with the good causes at an early stage. We haven't tackled scratch cards properly, and there's a real opportunity there because about 50% of adults buy scratch cards, which means there's a good chunk of people who either feel it's not for them or they just don't think about it. So that's an opportunity that we didn't really get to.
But good news for whoever follows you. You know what I mean? Like it's not like
well, some of these things we know about. We just don't. We just you got to prioritize things and just kind of tackle them. And it was unusual years because you had the pandemic and then you had this 19 million run.
Yeah.
So you had all sorts of things that were not normal. They weren't normal. So.
So moving on to what's next, what made you kind of start thinking about a different role?
Yeah. So I'm moving to a new job. We've got time in a company called Miro. Do you know what? I fancy learning some new stuff.
Okay.
So it's mostly B2B. B2B is not an area that I have spent a whole lot of time or energy on. Yet probably the vast majority of marketing roles are B2B. And I guess the things that I spend a lot of time on are not hugely done in B2B. So that's
in brand.
Yeah. So it's like if you pursue a career in brand management, you tend to try and get into consumer brands because I know Caroline's still here, but like you get to compete against the best and prove that you can, and that's a real interesting challenge, and it's consumer, so it's kind of you got the mass audiences and things like that. So I think partly because of that historically there hasn't been a huge influx of people with strong desires to brand manage and with experience in it to go B2B. So that's interesting. And there's a bunch of things that I know nothing about in kind of the SaaS kind of world and product-led growth. That all seems really interesting.
Okay.
So
what are you expecting, or have you any expectations of when you
expect it's going to be hard? I'm not going to put up any of my jazz hands talk. Yeah. I like it's a really interesting company. It's like they have 50 million users. It's not like they're small. like at the heart of what they do is they give the product away, which means like it's that's got to be the biggest advertising tool there is available. I think they're very strong on critical thinking, which I like. So I think there'll be a lot of trial and figure out, does something pay back before you kind of blow it out.
Yeah.
A bit like for those who don't know, myself and Connor ran experimental lab at one stage where we used to do marketing experiments. And it's just, I think it'll be a similar, what's the hypothesis? Why do we think, what's the model of advertising? When people see this and then they buy, what happened in the middle? And then to try and work back to say, can that become a profitable growth kind of a channel? And that's interesting.
Will the role, do you know yet, kind of go across all areas of the business? Because I think sometimes in B2B, what brand gets forgotten, sometimes then when it doesn't get forgotten, it doesn't make its way to sales or customer experience or customer service parts of the business. It sits within marketing. Do you have an ambition to kind of make sure the brand is across the full range of the company?
Yeah, I think so. I think the I haven't started yet, but the brand and the world of brand means lots of different things to different people. For some people, they think it's branding and identity. Other people think it's employer branding. Other people think it's a certain type of advertising. And of course, it's all of that and other stuff too. And what I'm hoping is, I think it's an amazing product, an amazing brand, and I'd like it to be a ubiquitous brand, which means that I would hope that it'll become famous, and that requires kind of getting stuck into all those bits and pieces.
Right, and so that's the ambition, for this to be a top 100 brand.
Yeah, I like, and it has all the ingredients already. So, and so the guy who hired me was a previous boss, and yours too, and he's a very ambitious marketer who thinks about scaling. And so
one of the things, you're going to go into a role that's effectively remote.
Yeah.
You're going to have teams in different countries. I know you've a reasonably strong view on the need for people to be together to actually do good work. How are you going to manage that?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. So everybody knows. So myself and Connor occasionally argue about this. So I think it's much harder when people are not in the room, and if you want to build if you want to build a team culture and you want to get everybody kind of on the same page, them being in the same room makes it easier, because there's so many breakdowns in communication. And so
how are you going to get across that barrier?
I'm going to travel a bit. So I would rather they all just came to Dublin, but that's not going to happen. So I'm going to have to just work harder. That's not the answer you want, is it?
But I guess, one of the things is, how do you create then a culture? You have that ambition. How are you going to create that culture?
Okay. Yeah. So the way I do it is I have a bunch of behaviors that I think are that I would ask people who are working with me to commit to, and those behaviors are hopefully geared towards effectiveness, towards kind of team alignment, such as I was talking about the other day, but such as, and I nicked this from a colleague of ours, like hard on the work, easy on each other. So and what this means is that there's a really high bar that is expected of the quality of the work, and anything less is not tolerated. And we get everybody to that high bar, which means having a really high knowledge base. But at the same time, it's expected that people are going to be nice to each other, and they're not going to beat each other up, and they're not going to have a go at each other, and they're not going to be disrespectful to their age. Is anyone here from Cork? Yeah, disrespectful to agencies. Sorry, and I'm just making sure she'll keep me honest, and works both ways, because it's hard to do good work. And I think that being explicit about that and holding people accountable to that sets the tone for quality of work, but also working together. And then there's like the 6 that I kind of work towards, but the other one that'll become particularly useful is this idea of strong opinions. Did we talk about this last time?
No.
Strong opinions weakly held, which is, again, I nicked it from someone else, but I really like it, is this idea that it's good to have strong opinions. I've got loads of them. But the idea is if the evidence doesn't support what you think is the way to go or what you've just done, then you are expected to change direction.
Yeah.
And that is very difficult to do because we're hardwired to kind of dig our heels in, and your ego gets in the way and all that kind of stuff. But
Look bad if you change course, it's
very hard when you stood in front of a bunch of people and
this
said,
is the thing we should do.
This is the right thing to do, and this is why it's going to work, and this is why I'm right. And then find out that none of the evidence, a bit like I was saying earlier on, so when some of the metrics are like, just, I couldn't find any evidence to suggest that this is working, then the answer is it's not working. And you got to just be accountable to that. And that's hard. But if you create the right culture, then you don't get people, because it's very easy to move the goalpost and find some metric that you can hang on to for dear life to say it works, but like
we did talk about it in the last one where we in our very first presentation to Paul Darcy, and we had nothing, and we were looking at them going, maybe that one works. I was like, no, there's nothing there. And we went to the blank slide. Yeah, it is hard, and I'm
sure I've told this, but we, like, even in the lottery, we did a campaign early this year, which we made. So we did a load of work on it. We produced it, a whole lot, and I actually, for my sins, I also presented on it beforehand, which I rarely do, but presented explaining how good I thought it was going to be. And then the research showed it wasn't going to go well, and so we did extra research to find out. And we test everything with System 1 as well as Red Sea, and we usually get very high scores, and this was kind of a mediocre score. And so I pulled the campaign, so we didn't go live with it. I told my CEO, and then I stood up in front of the company, showed them the scores, explained the mistake I think I'd made, and what we were going to do about it, and why it wouldn't happen again. And that's not fun. Like it's no fun having to go, I messed up here. Luckily we had a lot of goodwill because we've been doing good stuff for a few years, but it's still it's tough. But you got to create that environment where you feel like you can do that. I don't like doing it.
No, but you've written a book about it. So
that's true. A whole rake of them. Good timing there, Connor.
Roma Foxes Make Better Marketing Decisions, and it is a book that's a lot about the things you learn from getting things wrong.
It's you do learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes, and that's true, even though it's hard at the time. As long as you're willing to really look at it, like the overarching kind of theme on this is, if you're willing to really learn from your mistakes and actually be enthusiastic about discovering where you went wrong, as opposed to ashamed, then you've got a good chance of getting better.
Curiosity.
Yeah, it's curiosity and honesty, and like, unfortunately it only happens after like doing it for 20, 30 years. The opportunities for younger marketers who learn this early on,
but as leaders, and the role is to make sure the culture is right. We're coming to an end, Paul. Like, we're obviously in HubSpot for Startups, have kindly hosted us today. What advice, again, people listening to this may not have budgets of the National Lottery or Miro, for startups or people kind of, scaling their business. What advice do you have for them in terms of their marketing? What are the things you think they should be focused on?
Yeah, I spoke to Larry about this earlier. So what I would say is this: it's very hard, firstly, to ask any organization to invest in brand building if you're not going to measure it.
Mhm.
Like it's just like you might get a few months out of it, and then someone's going to pull the plug. So you do need to put measures in place. You don't have to do monthly research, but you do need to figure out if you're asking someone, if you like, you see this an awful lot. You see people going, "We want to raise awareness," but they don't actually have they don't have a measure of awareness.
Right.
So like, who's going to take that seriously? No one's going to be credible about that. I do think also for startups, I asked Peter Field this question at one stage when I was working with a startup, and he said you could probably survive for a couple of years just on pure activation. But what happens is, James
Herman.
he wrote this book on
Future demand.
Future demand, another one of Connor's interviews. But there's at some stage, if you're on pure activation, which is just chasing the people who are in the market, at some stage your responses tend to level off. Either competition comes in and therefore makes it harder, or the low-hanging fruit are no longer hanging, and you start to see the metrics all start to flatline. And Peter's advice was about a year before that is when he started investing in brand building. So I do think getting a measure of putting metrics in place. And it is getting easier to find and more cost effective to find some of those measures and do some of that stuff. I think it's really going to be important. I would say to any organization, any marketers, like really get yourself up to speed on the kind of the knowledge that's available on marketing effectiveness. Like it's readily available, and it's really important that you don't make schoolboy errors, like the difference between causation and correlation. I made all these, so I know this, but so that kind of stuff's really important. And I think the other practical thing I'd say is this. I see you got Colin in the audience. He might have a view on this later on, but like I think you can build distinctive assets off the bat. It's got nothing to do with advertising or spend. Just being very clear on, like, you use the same imagery and iconology and all that stuff, building that from and across all their touch points, regardless of having no budget, is really, really important.
Yeah, and I don't.
Well,
no budget.
You make an effort. Yeah. So that kind of stuff, I'd say, is got really, advertising can help amplify those things, but I certainly think there's lots of good reasons for people to start thinking about what are the distinctive assets, and then just be really rigorous in applying those.
Yeah. And look, I think reading Curiosity, obviously a great book, Run with Foxes. Are you going to do a second book? Bestseller. Yeah. Are you going to do a second one?
Someone suggested that I should do one running away from foxes, but no, I don't think I have any plans for a second one. I'm such a slow writer, and it took me like 6 months to edit it. So I don't think so. I'll wait till I get mass audience on this one. I'll wait till I catch up with Professor Barnsharp. Yeah.
Just be more controversial, Paul.
No, that's it. You see, I don't really go for that. I think it's too much for the headlines. Unfortunately, the answer to most questions is it depends. Doesn't make for a headline.
Could be the second book. Paul, listen, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck with Miro.
Thank you.
And looking forward to seeing and hearing how it all goes. Paul Dervan.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of That's What I Call Marketing. Thanks everyone here for joining, and thanks everybody listening or watching. Of course, if you did enjoy the episode, you can subscribe so you get notification of when our next episode lands. So for me, your host, Conor Byrne, until the next episode, thank you. Cheers. Goodbye.